All right, welcome back to TTP at Home. Last week, we interviewed Meg Basham. We didn't actually interview her. We had a live event with Meg Basham to discuss her book, Shepherds for Sale. And now we're bringing her into the studio to continue that conversation for anybody who was not able to be there in person. I think you're going to love it, so check it out.
Hello, True Texans. Today we are joined not only by Meg Basham, but also William Wolfe with the Center for Baptist Leadership. We partnered with these organizations for our event, and we learned that the church perhaps has some internal issues similar to what we see in politics. So welcome, Meg, and welcome, William. Let's get started with Meg. Why don't you tell us a little general overview about your book?
Sure. So, the subject matter really delved into something that I think so many of us have experienced over the last few years. And that was that we started to hear things from our pastors and from ministry leaders in previously trusted organizations that really sounded off. It felt like they were suddenly pushing left-wing political priorities and kind of just draping proof-texted Bible verses over them to try to convince us that Christians, in order to be faithful to Jesus, needed to do things like support open borders or embrace really anti-human climate change policies, or even to embrace LGBTQ rights, so-called, promote things like transgender, they would say care, I would say mutilation for children. And it was so disturbing to so many people to see this coming out of the mouths of Christian leaders and trying to understand where is this coming from. A previous book by Meg Basham titled Fault Lines delved into specifically how that was manifesting itself in the area of racial grievance, critical race theory. And I touch on that in the book, but I also look at, okay, where is this happening on other topics as well? And what I discovered is that it wasn't just organic and it wasn't just pastors and ministry leaders being influenced by the culture, but there was also a very deliberate infiltration effort on the left by some really powerful foundations run by people like George Soros to purposely move evangelicals to the left on so many of these issues. So it was very much an investigative work as well.
And how have people responded to that? I'm just going to assume it wasn't this wonderful embrace that says, oh, yes, you're right. And you're so smart. And thank you for pointing this out. How have people reacted to you?
Well, it's really depended on who is doing the reacting. I think part of the reason that the book became a New York Times bestseller and became this huge flashpoint of public debate was because so many people did recognize what I was writing about. And it really resonated with them. They reached out to me and said, I didn't know where it was coming from, but I knew that something felt off. I knew that this wasn't right. Some of the things that I was hearing at my church or, from some of my seminary or some of these other organizations that I used to trust. So there was really an outpouring of people who immediately recognized what I was writing about. But then you have some of these organizations and individuals who are well known, people like, say, Tim Keller or the Gospel Coalition or Christianity Today and Russell Moore. Since William is here, I'll bring up J.D. Greer and the ERLC and the Southern Baptist Convention. And people like that, obviously did not give it a particularly warm reception. But part of the reason, obviously, for that is that you don't expect to get a warm reception from the very people that you're critiquing in the book. So I don't think that was surprising. And I will say that almost universally, the negative reaction came from people closely associated with those ministries and institutions.
Okay, let's dig into it a little bit more deeply because we have time, and I want people that have maybe not read your book and didn't get to go to our event, take one issue and give us the specifics of how it's morphed, how they try to deceive us, and why it's bad.
So let's take a really hot topic right now, immigration. And we can see what's happened with that. If you go back, say, 10 years, there is an organization called the National Immigration Forum. And I'm going to use it as an example, not because it's exclusive or unique in this, but because it's a really good archetype of how this works. So it is a left of center, pro open borders group. It is well funded by people like George Soros, who have funneled millions of dollars into using this group to promote things like amnesty policies, expanding how many asylum seekers will allow in the country, just overall loosening our border policies. So what they realized is that they were having trouble getting some of these legislative goals across the finish line because evangelicals weren't buying in. And evangelicals, if you don't know this, are anywhere from 25 to 30% of the American electorate. And so it's really important to get their buy-in if you're trying to achieve anything legislatively. And so groups like the National Immigration Forum realized that that was going to be a problem. So what they did was they partnered with the National Association of Evangelicals, which is a trusted evangelical institution, been around for decades. People know it. People think they can trust it. And with them, they formed what you would call a front group. So they created this organization called the Evangelical Immigration Table. Now, legally, there is no separation between the National Immigration Forum and the Evangelical Immigration Table. What it is it's just a forward-facing front group that is supposed to look like, hey, we're evangelicals just like you, and we really support these open borders policies. And so that's what it's meant to do. And in fact, I can tell you that they got very granular to the point where they specifically in George Soros's leaked Open Society documents talked about how they were able to bring some Southern Baptist leaders on board and get groups like the ERLC to partner with this Evangelical Immigration Table group. So that's how it's worked, is that, the money has come in from the left. It goes into some, large umbrella group. And then that umbrella group then creates this little front face that claims to be evangelical. And what it does is it harnesses the power of well-known evangelical voices like the ERLC, like the Council for Christian Colleges and Universities. And then their job is to try to convince the average people in the pews that if we really want to be Christian, if we want to show the love of Jesus and be a good witness to a watching world, then we need to promote these policies too, because that's what our leaders are telling us. So that's kind of how the game works. And you can see it on any number of policies.
So first of all, I want to make sure, because people that don't run around in your circles aren't always going to know what these abbreviations are. So the ERLC, right. The ERLC is what?
Yeah, the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission, which is the public policy arm of the Southern Baptist Convention. So this is the group that is supposed to be representing the interests of Southern Baptists to our policymakers. But instead, they're getting involved with these other groups who I would think in many, many cases, and William can speak to this, don't actually represent the views of many Southern Baptists.
Let's talk about that. Maybe William is the person to ask about that. Why... Like of all the denominations, you have, everybody knows that the Methodists are kind of pretty far to the left, or, there's all these wishy-washy, the Catholics that, they're getting all this money from the government to do what they do, all that kind of stuff. But the Southern Baptist Convention, like people want to trust that. Like it's like the last holdout. And now you're talking about the ERLC and like, what is it? One or two people that have been bought off? Like, what is their motivation? Why are they turning against the truth?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. And Megan does address this in her book, particularly whether it's in the introduction, I think, or the first chapter, where she says, the Southern Baptist Convention has been specifically targeted by not just, left of center immigration groups, but on every other major issue, because the left rightly recognizes them as sort of the last firewall to having free reign in terms of shifting the entire conservative Republican voting bloc to the left. Back in the history of the Southern Baptist Convention, it was going liberal in the 60s and the 70s, primarily on more theological issues and less political issues. And the conservatives were able to bring it back back to biblical faithfulness. One of the men who led that effort, the conservative resurgence, his name was Adrian Rogers. He was a powerful preacher. And he had this line where he said, you know, as goes America, so goes the free world. And as goes the Southern Baptist Convention, so goes America.
Wow.
And so that's really the target here. They're trying to infiltrate us. And yes, there's still a lot of trust and cachet in terms of being conservative theologically and conservative politically under any given Southern Baptist Convention name or brand, whether that's a president of our seminaries or the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission or a Southern Baptist Convention president at the time, like this guy, J.D. Greer, who served as our president for 3 years. And so if the left can get to them and bring them into these efforts, then it gives them this big sort of conservative stamp of approval. And quite frankly, it's just subversion and infiltration. And if we don't stand up and fight this, we are going to lose this evangelical firewall against the Marxist left.
Well, and if I can add 2 other points about the Southern Baptist Convention, and, you know, I don't want to focus exclusively on them, but why they have been so important and why I did spend a lot of time on them in the book is, you know, just practically, they are the largest Protestant denomination in the United States. And they are recognized as being one of the most conservative denominations in the United States. So you get a lot of bang for your buck in targeting the Southern Baptists. And then in addition to that, they are in charge of some of the largest seminaries in the U.S. So they are educating a plurality of pastors, not just Baptist pastors, but in any Protestant denomination. So, you know, whether you're Anglican or PCA or Presbyterian, you're also going to be impacted by what's going on in the Southern Baptist Convention.
Can I jump in here? One of the things, the part of this that scares me so much is the deliberate deception that is going on. And I think we've seen since President Trump has been inaugurated, he's uncovering a lot of the corruption and the deceptive things that have been done for our government. And here at True Texas Project, of course, our main focus is education. So what do either of you can answer this question? What do you see as our role in helping to educate people about how this is happening in the churches and the deception and the corruption that's going on in the name of Jesus, but it's really in the name of political power?
Well, you know, a couple of things. And one, I think you are doing it. You know, we had an event, was it a week or 2 weeks ago now, to let people know that this is going on and then hosting conversations like this. But also, I think it's really important for people to understand that this is not new. I think you can hear something like this and it can be rather alarming. And it helps to know that historically, we have seen Marxists, communists do this before. And that's not controversial history. Like everyone will acknowledge that the Communist Party USA in the 1920s to 1950s made concerted efforts to infiltrate Catholicism and also mainline Protestantism. And they had a tremendous amount of success, particularly with the Episcopals. And that's part of why we see those main lines so far to the left today. And so that's part of it, is to go, look, this has happened before. And it's part of why you have to fight for your institutions. And you can't be afraid to bring these issues up, because history, if it's not going to exactly repeat itself, is at least going to look very familiar. And that's part of why we do this. And then also, I think there's been a tendency to feel that it's mean, or it is somehow rebellious even to push back against what's been coming out of so many of these ministries. And part of what I want to do is just bring out a message of, no, actually contending for the faith is not just a charge that the New Testament, particularly in the book of Jude, gives to pastors and leaders. It gives it to all Christians. We are all to contend for the faith, and we are all to respectfully, following the model of Matthew 18 and other passages, confront when legalism and unbiblical ideas are being brought into the church, but we are to confront it.
I think that's interesting that you say that there is a history of this, because I know some of the feedback I got when we first said that we were going to host you was, why are you making waves in the church? Why do you have to attack the church? and, I have a good church. My pastor is good. And yet, I went to my pastor. I go to First Baptist of Grapevine, and I invited the whole staff, anybody that does anything at the church. I was like, I will give you a free ticket. Just be there. And he was positive about it. Like, I didn't know what to expect from him. It was, she's doing great work. Meg is doing great work. I'm so glad you're hosting her. So I feel like you saying that this is not a new thing, it kind of lets people say, okay, I'm not attacking the church. I'm helping the church. Maybe William, can you address that a little?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good framing here. So you're not, when you are under attack, mounting a defense is not sort of an act of unjust violence, so to speak, right? I've said this before. I like this analogy. It's like, if you come upon two people in a fist fight, you really need to know who threw the first punch before you can make a moral judgment, right? Because at that moment in time, it looks like, okay, these guys are just fighting each other, but maybe one of them is acting in self-defense. That is exactly what's happening here in terms of the political infiltration from the left into the American church. Finally, slowly, this sleeping giant is waking up, American evangelicals, and realizing that they've been sort of led down a primrose path to support policies that are coming straight out of the WEF and the UN and George Soros organizations. And it doesn't at all comport with biblical scriptures and teaching. And actually the Bible uses some language that speaks this in terms of what shepherds are supposed to do. Shepherds are supposed to protect the flock from wolves. And right. So like when you are throwing rocks at wolves, they're definitely going to howl, but that doesn't mean that the wolves are in the right here. And so Christians, I think actually in this day and age, they need to sort of recover what I would call sort of a martial spirit for defending the truth and the integrity of our organizations, our denominations, and our institutions. And this ties directly into part of this whole project has been to get Christians to be less political while smuggling in policies under things like love your neighbor and it's just the gospel. Christians need to get more comfortable taking sort of political action, organizing, pushing back, education, equipping, and turning people out in order to fight this. And I think this is just the start of it. So Megan's book is fantastic, Shepherds for Sale. Bodie Baucham's book, Fault Lines. I'll recommend another book too. Owen Strand's book, Christianity and Wokeness, highlighted a lot of this. John MacArthur's been speaking to it. And then we've had new organizations come up like mine and American Reformer that are specifically trying to fill this gap. We've seen people do it in other industries. Think of like Chris Rufo as he's gone after DEI and wokeness in the academy, or there are people out there going after DEI and wokeness in America's corporations with ESG fundings. Well, we need to come after DEI, wokeness, and liberalism in the church as well. And it is an honest and good fight to have.
Why don't we, I don't think we really talked much about the Center for Baptist Leadership and American Reformer. We didn't really talk about what that actually is. Why don't you go ahead and give us insight into what you guys are working on?
Yeah, so what Meg sort of lays out in her book has culminated in the institutional capture of otherwise conservative, evangelical, and Protestant organizations. So there are a lot of Catholics in America and there are a lot of Protestants. Those are two big buckets. We are primarily focused on the Protestants, and that includes evangelicals. But places like Christianity Today, which was founded by Billy Graham, has now essentially just become the heart of the liberal resistance to the Trump agenda. I mean, who could have imagined that that's what it would be? This big organization called the Gospel Coalition, which had people like Tim Keller and Don Carson and lots of other people involved. They were promoting conservative reform theology, now are also promoting leftism. And so this was really exposed during Floyd and COVID. And so when we got into 2020 and 2021, a lot of conservative Christians were looking around and saying, who is speaking for us? I'm tired. I don't want to read another article about George Floyd. I would like to learn a little bit more how I can help defend my American homeland from the invasion that's coming on here and what the church can do about it. So American Reformer was launched by Nate Fisher and Josh Abatoy to help revitalize particularly Protestant institutions, churches, Christian schools, etc., Christian universities, and help equip them with the resources necessary to stand strong in face of these cultural influences and pressures. And so they're a journal, and then they also have this reform work where they do sometimes what are called campaigns within these institutions that are being subverted. Coming out of American Reformer, we're targeting the biggest fish in the pond, the Southern Baptist Convention. And that's what the Center for Baptist Leadership is here to do. We're here to secure institutional revitalization of the Southern Baptist Convention, driving out the wokeness, the theological liberalism, and the compromise, and looking to raise up a new generation of Baptist leaders in America to contribute positively to efforts in the public square, to train the future generation of pastors. And most fundamentally, I'll close with this, is to ensure that the gospel mission of the Southern Baptist Convention, which sends more missionaries than any other church out there, which plants more churches in America than any of the other denomination out there, is actually taking the true gospel of Jesus Christ and not some watered down version of the gospel with liberal priorities stamped all over it.
That's a big to-do list. But you did mention some other things. So I asked Megan to be specific, like give us one example, and she talked about immigration, which obviously is huge. But then you mentioned publications like Christianity Today. Megan, can you give us more examples for those that weren't at the presentation? I mean, it was just like bam, bam, bam. We're all taking screenshots of your slides, because we're just like, it's everywhere you turn, anything that has any tinge of Christianity to it. So give us some more, I think, of what people can take home with them.
Well, as William was talking there, a particular example that involves Christianity Today jumped into my mind that, we just witnessed through this past election. And it was specifically targeting this particular presidential election. And it was a group called the After Party. So we talk about why it's so important to build up these institutions on the right. And it's because, look, the left is interested in you, whether you think you want to participate in politics as a member of the church or not. And to give you this example, so a group called the After Party, it's a sort of political Bible study, and its mission, it said, was to reframe how Christians think about politics. And it was written and developed by three people: a Democrat Duke Divinity professor, a man named Curtis Chang, New York Times writer David French, and Christianity Today's editor-in-chief Russell Moore. Now, all three are confirmed Never Trumpers. And in fact, two of those men were open Kamala Harris voters, Chang and French. And in developing this, they promoted it as something that Christians should bring onto their college campuses, into their churches, into their ministries. The Council for Christian Colleges and Universities, which represents 183 schools across the country, including some of the most well-known Christian campuses, including Baylor, Wheaton, Biola. They promoted this curriculum. So that's a lot of firepower, right, behind this brand new initiative to help reframe how Christians think about politics. So the Christian College, Council for Christian Colleges and Universities, promoted it to their schools. So it was rolling out all over the country in early 2024. And the question was, okay, when you look at the substance of it, it was subtle, but it was very much teaching that white Christian voters who trend conservative are afraid of diversity, and that's why they vote the way they do. So to show that you are not someone who is afraid of diversity, then what are you supposed to do with your vote? It taught that things like abortion shouldn't define your vote. That isn't necessarily the only way you should decide how you vote. But on the other hand, it taught that you do have an obligation to vote to end systemic racism. So though it was subtle, it was very clear which direction it was pushing you. Well, then I started digging down into some of the financials, going, all right, who is funding this thing that's rolling out all over Christian college campuses and in churches? And you find out it is exclusively funded by hard left secular foundations like Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors, which also funds things like quote unquote transgender affirming care for children. And also the Hewlett Foundation, which is the second largest funder of Planned Parenthood in the country. So no Christians were funding this supposedly Christian curriculum. And even further, as we got very close to the election, one of its creators, David French, admitted on a podcast that its purpose was actually to take on MAGA. That's a direct quote. So this was something that was packaged as, this is just to show us how to have, more compassionate, more brotherly conversations around politics. But in fact, it's hard left funded, and its purpose was to defeat Trump. So there's a really specific example.
One of the things that struck me about your speech Megan, was when you showed the billboard from Gavin Newsom in California, saying California needed abortion. California is here to help. And then he had the love thy neighbor scripture written under there. I shared that and Julie shared that on social media. It's gotten a lot of responses, but that is just, I don't know. It's downright evil to me to say that.
No, it is. It is absolutely evil.
Yeah.
Yeah, if I could say something on that, Fran, that's a great example. In Isaiah, it warns us, Isaiah 5, woe to those who call good evil and call evil good. And what is a key feature of all of these things, all these organizations exposed in Megan's book, is a way that they pervert Christian language about love and compassion and caring for others, which are wonderful things that we should do, but they always put it like way out of order. So have compassion for a woman who has an unplanned pregnancy, but not on the child in her womb. Have compassion on millions of illegal immigrants who have crossed our borders, many of which who are part of human trafficking cartels and drug running operations, but don't have compassion on the American citizens living in the small towns that are being destroyed by by this influx of migrants. Don't have compassion on Lake and Riley's family. Don't have compassion on the families who have lost loved ones to fentanyl overdoses. It's like have compassion for everybody in the world except for the people you actually live next to. And so fundamentally, they are, honestly, I would say they're sort of doing the devil's work, if the devil is the father of lies, by taking pseudo-Christian language and concepts and sort of inverting them to advance an anti-human agenda. It's really dark stuff.
And I do want to say, I feel like it's okay to say, look, I think that Christians can, in good faith, have different views on what our immigration policies should be. I think they can have different views on, do I think that climate change is an existential threat, or do I think it is something that humanity is probably likely to weather just fine with a few small adjustments? I don't have a problem with that. What I have a problem with is what William just said, which is taking scripture and twisting it in a legalistic way to demand that all Christians must agree. So rather than having these public policy debates, like what should our immigration policy be, it's you're not loving your neighbor, you're not welcoming the stranger if you don't agree to these particular policies. So that's where I really have an issue. I really am okay to debate some of these in the political sphere, but that's not what they're wanting to do. They're wanting to circumvent that public debate and instead try to sort of emotionally manipulate you into signing on to this because you think, well, gosh, I don't want to be a bad Christian.
Mm-hmm. Have you seen any positive results? So like today I was talking to somebody about, in one of your slides, you had talked about Chick-fil-A and how they were promoting DEI policies and refused to give charity to companies that don't, or that are against LGBTQ, right? So you had that slide and somebody pushed back and said, well, they don't support DEI anymore. Like they've already changed. And if you go to their website, it's true. They've changed all their verbiage. And I don't know how recent that is, but I'm wondering if because of your book, or at least since your book, if you have noticed any positive results.
So here's what I think has happened. I have not had anyone that who is high profile in the book come out and say, I repent, I got this wrong. And I didn't really expect that. But, which I think it would be great to see. And I think for some people, that's fine. You can just sort of shift positions. There are a few people in there though, that I absolutely think need to come out and say, I repent of this. But what I have seen more is some squishier pastors, you might say, who sort of adopted, issues like racial grievance, critical race theory, who were very much on the front lines of the Black Lives Matter moment, where they said, well, I don't exactly support this organization, but we should march with them and we should use their slogan or things of that nature. They're no longer doing that. And in fact, some of them have come over to the conservative side, and it almost feels like they're just repositioning themselves. And I don't know, I can't read their heart. So I go, is this because there was a sea change and they realize I need to reposition where I am, or I'm going to lose the following that I have? Or did they do it out of a real, genuine recognition? You know what? I thought that through some more and I got it wrong. I don't know, but I've seen it and I think it's really good to see.
Okay.
I've got a great example of really positive change, just real quickly. There's a major, a sort of a mega church pastor in the Southern Baptist Convention named Willie Rice, and he's in Florida. And he, in the height of sort of the woke stuff, he was sort of leading efforts in the wrong direction in the Southern Baptist Convention. In fact, he ran for Southern Baptist Convention president, but had to drop out. One of the sort of woke issues we're dealing with in the SBC is allegations of an abuse crisis in the SBC that doesn't really exist. It's really sort of like the Me Too movement in the church. He was sort of in on that and in on some racial stuff. And then the lefties burned him hard and it caused some soul searching. Then he went and talked to the conservative guys, and he actually came on my podcast, and the title was Waking Up in a Woke World, Willie Rice and His Story. And he tells how he realizes everything Megan's talking about, all this stuff that was smuggled in. He's like, I wanted to do good things. I wanted to help hurting people. And then I realized there was a much deeper and darker agenda at play here. And I'm sorry for my role in it. And that's probably one of our most viewed podcasts. And it was big for him. It'd be like this. Let me put it in political terms. Be like a member of the establishment party, sort of apologizing for everything they've done to work with Democrats and then joining the Freedom Caucus and becoming a freedom fighter. Right. And so and this was before Megan's book came out, but I think she engaged with him some potentially. But that was a really positive movement that we saw with our work at CVL.
Okay. So that's actually a great segue because I'm wondering if I'm sure you guys are very comfortable naming some names. So I'm very involved in politics and I'm aware vaguely of politics in the church. Okay. So when you throw out names like Russell Moore and David French, and I'm like, now every famous name that I think, oh yeah, I've heard that name somewhere. I'm like, oh, he must be bad. So who are the bad ones and who are the good? Is there anybody we can trust?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the ways that I had kind of pinpointed, I think that testing moment of COVID really showed you who were some of the guys who were going to stand strong. And so you saw some of the old stalwarts like John MacArthur just absolutely stood there like a rock and said, we are not capitulating to this. And I think you did see some churches all over the country who suddenly you saw people standing up and saying, we're not going to participate in shutting down the churches because the government tells us so over something that is absolutely none of Caesar's business. So those are some of the people. Tom Askell is another great example, a Southern Baptist pastor who fought the good fight to much derision and teeth gnashing. If you're not familiar with him, he's in the Southern Baptist Convention. And when they were promoting critical race theory with a resolution it adopted it as a positive analytical tool, and the platform promoted it. The entire weight of the institutional leadership promoted it. He kind of stood out there on his own and was, crying in the wilderness. No, this is unbiblical. We do not show this kind of ethnic partiality, and this is not godly. So those are the people that I look at them and I go, man, they withstood so much fire just to be faithful. So I am by no means pessimistic on that. And look, these are just the well-known guys, right? I mean, there's a lot of pastors whose names I don't know all over the country who are doing good, faithful things. And a lot of them have started writing to me. I'm sure William hears from them too. And so, you won't know their names, but they're faithfully, guarding their sheep in their churches. And, so one big thing, and I do want to emphasize this because there are so many negative stories on the church coming from these deconstructionists. People are like, oh, you got to get out. The church is so compromised. That is not at all what I want the message of my book to be. I am pro the church. I encourage everyone, look, we're commanded as Christians to be a part of a local body. So go to church.
Okay. I like that. Did you want to add anything to that, William? That question about?
Yeah, sure. I'll fire off a top X number list of some of the most problematic actors and individuals, and then a top X number of list of some of the best guys. So in American conservative evangelicalism, some of the most problematic big name actors over the last decade would include people like Russell Moore, who was a Southern Baptist Convention guy who ran our Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission, huge never Trumper. And now he was the editor in chief at Christianity Today. So Russell Moore, J.D. Greear. J.D. Greear runs a mega church called the Summit in North Carolina, which is very closely situated to one of our seminaries, Southeastern. He's incredibly problematic. Lots of DEI, wokeness, and soft left stuff from him. Russell Moore, J.D. Greear. Here's one that'll maybe throw a rock in your Texas pond. Matt Chandler. Matt Chandler has this video clip of him essentially saying he would practice racial discrimination in pastoral hiring. He said, if a committee comes to me and says, hey, I've got an Anglo 8 for you, or like an African American 6, which one do you want? And he's like, give me the African American 6. I want representation. I mean, it's arguably illegal. So J.D. Greear, Russell Moore, Matt Chandler, another guy who's been incredibly popular in the American conservative evangelical space for many years is a guy named David Platt. He's a big speaker. He talks about missions, but really what Platt does is he preaches something I call poverty gospel, where he tells people to like forsake anything you could have in this world, home, inheritance, things like that. Go take the gospel around the world. Like that's good. But the guy also like drives a Range Rover and lives in like Northern Virginia and pastors a mega church that he's sort of running into the ground there, McLean Bible Church. David Platt's another big one, Thebediana Weeblay. And then a couple organizations I would name would be World Relief, which is out there in the news a lot today. Actually, this is, Megan, I just finally put these dots together. The Evangelical Immigration Table is a product of the National Association of Evangelicals and the National Immigration Forum. World Relief is also a product of the National Association of Evangelicals. So it's like illegal immigration and refugee resettlement. World Relief says they're helping resettle refugees, but really they live off of federal grants. Like that's where they get all their funding from. World Relief, Evangelical Immigration Table, Christianity Today. Those are kind of the top ones. Some of the good ones. So here's some of the good ones people know. John MacArthur, Vodi Bakum, this guy, Tom Askell, Founders Ministries. And then, I think Al Mohler's had sort of like back and forth on a lot of these issues, but he's moved in a much better direction. This guy, Andrew Walker's doing good work. And then now this gets a little out there, but this guy, Doug Wilson in Moscow, Idaho, he's a Presbyterian pastor. A lot of people like him. He does good stuff on these issues. So those are good guys to follow. There's lots more. Zachary Garris in the Presbyterian Church, et cetera. That would be my good list.
That's incredible. That's such valuable information because we really don't know who to trust. So along those same lines, I just want to let everybody that's watching know that Meg and William are both, and Nate Fisher, who was supposed to be on this call but couldn't make it. They're all on X. And that's where we have the best conversations. Right. So I would encourage everybody to just look them up there if you want to just stay abreast of, what's happening as it's happening. It's really good. So if I was just an average person that I'm involved in politics and now I've watched this and I'm like, oh crap, what's going on in my church? I don't know. Like, I know the tendency is going to be, well, I love my pastor. I love my church. I love my Sunday school teacher. This really doesn't affect me. So what would be your advice to them? I mean, obviously we can't all go to the Southern Baptist Convention. I mean, just like we don't all go to the GOP convention, right? So
but more need to, by the way, we need more messengers.
Yeah, I don't even know what that process is. I'm a Baptist. Yeah. So
I can talk you through that.
Okay.
We should do a whole separate event on that prior to the convention, but yes.
Do they meet annually?
Yes. And they vote. And they vote on things that set the trajectory for what, are supposed to set the trajectory for what that public policy arm lobbies for in Washington. So it is actually important. The institutional leadership tends to get their people in the building because it's, over 10,000 it's called messengers, which are like delegates show up to vote. And so, these institutional leaders tend to get all their employees and staffers in the room. So it's important to have average people in the pews and, average Southern Baptists in that room making their voice heard too.
Well, especially if we're the ones that are educated on what's going on, it would make sense that we would take that next step and represent the church.
Yes.
And it's in Dallas this year.
Oh.
So if you're listening to this and you're a Southern Baptist in Texas, this is what you do. You go to your pastor, just have lunch, have coffee, and say, hey, are we planning to go to the Southern Baptist Convention this year? And are we planning to send all of the voting messengers that we can? Really, what's happened in the Southern Baptist Convention is apathy and disengagement. Churches get either a minimum of 2 or a maximum of 12 voting messengers that they can send, depending on the size of the church in relation to their giving. A lot of churches get a lot more to send than they usually do. And quite frankly, we have some articles on this at CBL. Pastors kind of use it as a vacation. They come, they bring their wife or like their assistant pastor, and they leave like 5, 6, 7 voting messengers off the table. And so what we need is engaged lay members who care about these issues, who are aware, just to say, hey, can I be a messenger to the SBC? And by getting more and more people there to participate in the process, we can hold them accountable and move things in the right direction. So if you're in Texas and you're a Baptist, come to Dallas in June.
Yeah.
Sounds to me like it works just like politics.
Yeah.
It does.
The process is not dissimilar, I'll say.
Yeah. So what if somebody is not a Baptist or doesn't want to go to the convention? What do we tell them to do?
Well, a key thing I think is, look, I'm not suggesting go stir up trouble in your church, especially
That's what we do. Come on.
Right. If you have a good church, though, that's doing what it should be doing, then that's wonderful. But if you are seeing some of this influence come in, if you're seeing, like, let's say the after party curriculum is coming into your church, or this incredibly racially divisive curriculum called Be the Bridge, if that sort of thing is coming into your church, you need to confront it. I'll even use the word winsomely, but you need to winsomely talk to your pastor and not ignore it and say, hey, can you tell me why we are choosing to bring this in? And do you understand who funds it? And do you understand what the content is of this curriculum? Because I think a lot of times busy pastors, they're preparing messages. They're seeing to, people, their membership that may be in the hospital. They're doing weddings and funerals. They may not know. And so it's important to assume like, hey, maybe they don't have the information. And I'm doing a service as a member of my church, just letting them know, hey, this is harmful. We shouldn't have this. And let me give you some background on where this comes from. So absolutely do that. I would say also that we need to have a better political theology in the United States so that we understand what our role is as Christians to be salt and light in a republic and what that looks like. Because I think so often we assume that godliness is disengagement, and it isn't.
Gosh.
That's so we've used the word politics a couple of times and we said it's like politics, but let me just sort of very briefly make a sort of larger like philosophical point is that whenever you get people together in a polis, there's politics involved, right? So it's like your church is a political body in the sense that it's a group of people partnering together for a common mission. A denomination is a political body because it's churches partnering together in a common mission. So there are politics. And so in the church, as in, partisan politics, it's the same steps. What do we do? You get educated first, right? So get educated, get informed. And so I think some of the best organizations covering issues like these out there, well, one would be Megan's X feed. So make sure to follow her on X, but check out organizations like American Reformer, Center for Baptist Leadership, Founders Ministries. There's an organization out there called Truth Script as well that's engaging a lot of issues in the church. There's an organization called Clear Truth Media too, that are sort of beginning to address these issues. So look for those right of center Christians who are engaging these issues. I'm sure there's many more I could be mentioning. Danbury Institute, Conservative Baptist Network. So get informed. And once you're educated and informed, then I would say you sort of need to inhabit the posture of a watchman, right? A watchman on the wall. What is coming into your church? What is coming into your denomination? Who is your pastor quoting or recommending in sermons? Are they sound? Are they faithful? If you hear a name mentioned in a sermon that you don't know, say somebody like Gavin Ortland on climate change, you should go Google him and see who that is and what message they're sharing. And does it comport with what you understand to be the beliefs of your denomination, your church? So get educated, be a watchman. And then, I really do believe, we don't want to cause trouble, but we do want to defend the faith. And so have, the appropriate conversations necessary with anybody involved in your church if things are going leftward. And sometimes you might have to sort of vote with your feet and find a new church, right? So if your church is waving Black Lives Matter flags, LGBT flags, or trans flags outside the sanctuary, that's not really a church anymore and you need to find a new one. But a lot of churches aren't there, but here's what's happening. They're slowly but surely moving on that path. And your job as a faithful Christian is to stand up and say, this is not the direction that the Bible would have us go.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point to make, is that sometimes we stay and fight and sometimes we just need to find a new church. I know that even in my church, we had a guest speaker once that came in and said something that was so wrong, and it made me so mad. And I immediately went on Facebook and I was like, this is what he said and this is why it's wrong. And of course, the whole church came against me and got mad. But I feel very confident in that. Now people are paying more attention. Like, I just want people to learn to listen for the buzzwords, the keywords, and don't just swallow it because they hear it from the altar. Like, you have to have a discerning ear, and then you have to speak up. Even if it makes you uncomfortable, you have to speak up. So this has been a great conversation, and unfortunately we're out of time. I feel like we can just talk about this forever because it's right. So, I mean, like, we are fighting for the soul of America, right? So it's so important. But any last words before I cut anybody off that you want to? I know we want people to. This is what happened when Meg spoke. Okay, we had a whole bunch of books for sale, and people were just going in and not really buying the book. Then they heard Meg speak, and then within minutes, every single one of her books was gone because it's
good here.
Yeah, it was good to see. We were excited because that meant it was valuable to have you in, whet their appetites, and then they wanted to dig in and hear more. And so that's what I really encourage. I mean, William has given everybody some great resources to continue to learn. Your book is a great resource. So that's what I would encourage people to do, is to just get educated and get involved, just like we say about every topic. So, again, any last words?
My last word has been, Proverbs tells us that a righteous man leaves an inheritance to his children's children. And so I think it's really important to think about what we have been entrusted with in this nation. And that's not just financial inheritance. We have a spiritual inheritance and a civic inheritance to leave to our kids. And that's why it's so important to engage on these issues and not just become complacent.
Very good.
Yeah, my last word would be this: don't check out. Check in and get engaged. The Center for Baptist Leadership actually shipped out 350 copies of Megan's book. It took us a little while to do it, but we got it done. They went out the door. And in a letter I wrote to everybody who got that book, I said, I want to make an ask of you before you read this. Do not let it discourage you, and do not let it cause you to check out. Let it fuel your desire to defend the faith once for all delivered to the saints, and to fight for our Christian and conservative institutions in America. These next 4 years under Donald Trump is a time for us to press the attack on all these fronts. If Trump can get wokeness out of our executive branch with a few swipes of his pen, well, then why can't Christians stand up and defend our own institutions as well? So get informed and get involved, and don't quit until it really is time to. And I guarantee you, on places like the Southern Baptist Convention and elsewhere, it's not time to quit yet.
I don't think there'll ever be a time to quit, but we do have to quit this interview. So we're going to wrap up with a few announcements really quick. If you guys would just hold tight, let us get through that. I wanted to let everybody know that Texas Tough, our tickets have gone on sale. That's our annual gala. It is a huge, huge deal. You guys, we do more at our gala than anybody else does. We desperately want to entertain you and just have a good time together as activists, because we work hard and we want to play hard too. So we have, of course, the dinner and, the drinks. We have live music and dancing. We've got actor Kevin Sorbo as our keynote speaker. And then we, of course, we shoot off cannons. We've got fireworks. And this year we're adding cards, poker, and, dominoes. So, and a shootout contest. You guys, it just doesn't end.
Like very Texan.
So, and we even have dance lessons leading up to the event, so that there's no excuse to say, I don't know how to dance. So a lot of country dancing. So we just really encourage you guys to go online and get those tickets. They are on sale now, and they will sell out. So I know everybody's going to come to Fran and I at the 11th hour and say, I didn't get a ticket. Can you get me in? No, we can't get you in. It's sold out. So go get your ticket. Okay, Fran, tell us about the legislative session.
Yeah, ledge session is in full swing. We are down there every Tuesday doing whatever we need to do. We have buses going from different parts of the state at least once a month. And on March 11th, I think we have 4 buses coming from all different parts of the state. check that out. It's all on our website calendar. Our special True Texan Day at the Capitol will be March 3rd. We got some really good things lined up for that day, including our featured speaker will be Land Commissioner Dawn Buckingham. So that'll be cool. Kids Day at the Capitol is March 25th. We're already getting some good signups for that. I think if you've got little ones in this kind of the 3rd through 6th grade category, although anybody is welcome, moms and dads and grandmas and grandpas and brothers and sisters. So it'll be a fun day and they will learn something. Julie, back to you.
Okay, so our February meetings all start. We have all of our meetings the 2nd and 3rd weeks of the month. So this month, let me just share with you some of our speakers. We've got people talking about situational awareness, toll roads in Texas, which is always a problem, immigration, of course, government land grabs, and then a lot of training on being involved in the Texas legislation, like how to use the TLO online, that sort of thing. So check your calendar to see what's near you. We also have over a dozen social activities going on because, like I said, we like to work hard and play hard. And then if there's no satellite near you, so you can't go to a meeting, make sure you check online to see if there is a home group near you, TTP at home. And then if there isn't a home group near you, you should start one. Because that we really believe that is where True Texas Project is going to explode. Small groups at home where you can affect your own community. Action items, Fran, you got anything?
We do. Get to the Capitol if you can on Tuesdays, and if you cannot, watch for my Friday messages. Every Friday, I'm putting out a summary of what happened in the legislature that week and what we're going to be doing the following week. And there's always a list of things that you can do from home or from your office without going to Austin. It doesn't require going down there. So watch out for those. As things start to develop, there will be lots more action to do. The Senate is in full swing. They've made a bunch of committee assignments, and they're already holding hearings. Hopefully the House will start doing that soon too. So that's where we really shine, is with these committee hearings, where we can actually contact committee members and convince them to do what we want them to do.
That's right. We also have local elections coming up. So if you are not running for city council or school board, that means you have found somebody else to run. So you get to choose. Either you're running or you recruit somebody to run and then help them campaign. So the deadline, what is that, February 10th or February 14th?
February 14th.
Valentine's Day. Okay, you guys, that's the deadline to get your name on that ballot and then start full steam ahead campaigning. Get to your January meeting. And then, of course.
No, your February meeting, Julie.
Oh, February meeting. Wow, Lee. We're already, sorry, time flies. So get the book. This is Meg's book. I don't know, it might be backward on your screen, but you can read backward. So True Texas Project, always blowing and going. We have got so much going on all the time. There's no excuse not to get involved. And when you do, politicians fear us, and we absolutely love that. We love being feared. So here's to Texas.
Here's to Texas.
And here's to True Texans. All right. Thanks, everybody.